An emperor commands the largest army on earth. He cannot survive dinner. Gold plates. A food taster paid to die first. Guards at every door. A mushroom that never should have reached the mouth. A cup of cold water that shouldn't have been cold. From Rome to Beijing, from Buonconvento to the Forbidden City, the same moment repeats. 10 emperors, 10 dinner tables, 10 people at the table who already knew. The killer is always someone the emperor kissed goodnight, adopted, married, or trusted with his son. By the time the taste registered, the empire was already changing hands. Every time. Number 10. Rome, the last night of 192 AD. Commodus was 31. He had spent a decade turning himself into an image. He wore a lion skin because Hercules had worn one. He fought in the arena because gods fought monsters. He renamed the months of the calendar after himself, and he renamed Rome after himself too. On paper, he was the son of Marcus Aurelius. In reality, the Senate hated him, the treasury was empty, and his own household was terrified of what he might do next. The household was where the danger lived. His mistress, Marcia, found a list. On it were the names of people Commodus intended to execute the next morning. Her name was there. So were the names of the Praetorian prefect Latus and the chamberlain Eclectus. 3 of the people closest to the emperor had one night to act. They chose poison. Marcia gave him wine at dinner. He drank it. He vomited it back up before it could finish him. The plot was exposed. There was no going back. They called for Narcissus, a professional wrestler kept in the imperial household, and Narcissus strangled the emperor in his own bath. The next day, statues came down across Rome. The Senate voted damnatio memoriae. Within 3 months, his successor Pertinax was dead too, killed by the Praetorian Guard after 87 days. The empire itself was then auctioned, literally, to the highest bidder. The year of the 5 emperors began at a dinner table where a woman read her own name on a list and decided to pour the wine before the wine could pour for her. The poison was the warning. The wrestler was the weapon. But the wrestler only came because the wine failed. The poison that failed at Commodus's table had killed emperors before him, cleanly. 3 centuries earlier, at a banquet by the Black Sea. Number 9. Sinope, on the coast of Pontus, around 120 BC. Mithridates V held a lavish banquet in his own palace. He was king of a wealthy Black Sea kingdom, a nominal ally of Rome, a ruler whose face appeared on coins from Anatolia to the Aegean. He had a queen, Laodice VI, who preferred their younger son over their elder. He had a court divided between factions. He had a table full of trusted guests. At some point during that banquet, someone put poison into a dish or a cup, and the king died at his own party. The killer was never named. Greek and Roman writers who described the event centuries later, Strabo and Appian among them, treated it as assassination, but could not say by whom. His son, Mithridates VI, was still a teenager. He fled into the mountains for 7 years, and there he began the practice that made him famous. Every day, according to the tradition, he swallowed a small dose of poison, then a slightly larger one. He built up an immunity in his own body because he had seen his father die at a table and refused to let it happen the same way. The Romans called this practice Mithridatism. The word survives in modern toxicology. The twist arrived decades later. Mithridates VI became the most dangerous enemy Rome fought in the 1st century BC. He waged 3 wars against them. He was eventually cornered, and he tried to end his life the way he had spent it, preparing not to be ended. He drank poison. It did not work. His body had become a fortress. He had to ask a bodyguard to draw a sword and finish him. The father died at a dinner table in Sinope. The son spent his life making his own body immune, and when he needed to die, his body would not let him. For 1,000 years after Sinope, the dinner table killing became a habit of empires. Sometimes the weapon looked like a chalice, sometimes it looked like a sacrament. Number 8. August 24th, 1313. A small town called Buonconvento, in Tuscany, halfway between Siena and the Papal States. Henry VII of Luxembourg, the first Holy Roman Emperor in over 60 years, was riding south with his army. He had been crowned in Rome the year before by a papal legate. Dante had written poems about him, calling him l'Alto Arrigo, the High Henry, the man who would restore imperial order to a fractured Italy. He had besieged Florence and failed. He had regrouped in Pisa. He was marching to break the Guelph resistance for good. At Buonconvento, he took communion from his Dominican confessor, a friar named Bernardino da Montepulciano. Within hours, he was dead. His soldiers whispered that the wafer had been poisoned, that Robert of Naples had commissioned it, that the Guelph faction had reached the emperor through the one thing he could not refuse, the body of Christ. Modern historians lean toward malaria as the actual cause, but that reframing came 600 years too late. For medieval Europe, the murder weapon was the sacrament. The story spread from Buonconvento outward for a century. It shaped Luxembourg dynastic memory so completely that later emperors of the same family, Charles IV and Sigismund, were accused of poisoning plots by their own adversaries. Henry's body was carried north over the Alps and buried in Pisa Cathedral. His tomb is still there. His son, John of Bohemia, failed to inherit the imperial title. Louis IV of Bavaria took it instead. He died taking the body of Christ. History has never fully agreed whether it was murder, but for the century after, it did not matter what had actually killed him. It only mattered what everyone was sure had killed him. In the Holy Roman Empire, the poison entered through the sacred. In Constantinople, it entered through the marriage bed. Number 7. Byzantine Empire, April 11th, 1034. Romanos III. Argyros had been emperor for 5.5 years. His reign had been mostly a failure. He had lost a battle in Syria, drained the treasury on building projects, and married Zoe Porphyrogenita only because Zoe's father, Constantine VIII, had demanded it on his deathbed. Zoe was in her 50s by then, and the marriage was joyless from the first day. She wanted a lover. She found one in Michael the Paphlagonian, a low-born official from Anatolia who had come to court as a servant. According to the Byzantine chronicler Michael Psellos, whose chronographia is the main source for this period, Zoe and Michael began giving Romanos small doses of poison at meals. He wasted for months. Ambassadors noticed the change. The court noticed. Psellos writes that Romanos himself noticed, and yet he kept eating, every night, with her. Byzantine writers who described the story afterward were baffled by this, and modern historians remain divided. Some read it as denial, some read it as physical weakness, some read it as the specific horror of a marriage where refusing the meal would confirm what he was afraid to say out loud. On April 11th, 1034, Romanos was found dead in his bath. The palace announced natural causes. Byzantine chroniclers insisted that the slow poisoning had weakened him enough that his killers drowned him to complete the work. Zoe married Michael the Paphlagonian the same day. He was crowned Michael IV before nightfall. Romanos's gold histamenon nomisma, the coin with his face, still exists in museum cases across Europe. It looks almost identical to the coins minted for Michael IV afterward. Same weight, same purity, same imperial pose. The only thing that changed was the name. He was murdered at his own dinner table over the course of a year. The strangest fact is that he sat down every night knowing. Nothing in Byzantium was as coldly efficient as what happened one afternoon in a Chinese banquet hall in 146 AD, when an 8-year-old emperor was handed a bowl of soup. Number 6. Luoyang, capital of the Eastern Han, July 146 AD. Emperor Ji of Han was 8 years old. He had been placed on the throne the previous year by the Grand Marshal Liang Ji, brother of the Empress Dowager. Liang Ji had chosen the boy specifically because he was young enough to be controlled. He had already vetoed an adult candidate, Prince Swan of Qinghe. The book of the later Han is unusually direct about this. Liang Ji wanted a puppet. He picked a child. The problem was that the child was intelligent. At an imperial gathering, Ji looked at Liang Ji, blinked, and called him Ba Jiang, an arrogant general. The room heard it. Liang Ji heard it. It was a child's line, a schoolroom challenge, the kind of thing a boy says because he does not yet understand the geometry of the room he is standing in. Liang Ji understood the geometry perfectly. He also understood that the boy would keep growing. 1 week later, Liang Ji ordered his underlings to poison a bowl of pastry soup and serve it to the emperor. The Book of the Later Han preserves what happened next. The child drank it. Within minutes, he was in agony. He called for water, believing water could save him. Liang Ji was standing beside him. He ordered the servants to give the emperor none. The boy died at the table. No investigation was permitted. Liang Ji installed the next emperor, Huan, at 14, already engaged to Liang Ji's own sister. The Liang family owned the Eastern Han for another 13 years. Their power ended in 159, when Emperor Huan finally massacred them in a coordinated purge. But the damage was permanent. The court that had allowed a regent to poison a child at a banquet had made itself into something that could not be trusted again. Within a generation, warlords began carving the empire apart. The child emperor's last request was water. His executioner was standing close enough to deny it. He was not the youngest emperor to die at a table. In 6 AD, a 13-year-old had been handed a cup of pepper wine by the man who called himself his father-in-law. Number 5. Chang'an, capital of the Western Han, winter of 5 AD. Emperor Ping was 13. He had been emperor for 6 years. His wife was 15. His wife's father was Wang Mang, regent, statesman, moralist, self-styled restorer of ancient virtue, and the most powerful man in the empire. Wang Mang had killed the boy's maternal uncles in 3 AD after they conspired against him. The boy remembered. Wang Mang knew he remembered. And as Ping approached the age when he could rule in his own name, the window on Wang Mang's regency was closing. Han court histories record what Wang Mang did next. During a winter offering ceremony, he presented the 13-year-old with a cup of pepper wine, a traditional New Year drink spiked with poison. As Ping lay dying over the next several days, Wang Mang wrote a private petition to the gods. In it, he offered his own life in exchange for the emperor's. Then he had the petition sealed, locked in a chest, and hidden. The document was meant to be discovered later, as proof of loyalty and grief. Some modern historians accept the possibility that Ping died naturally. The Chinese historical tradition, from Bangu's Book of Han onward, does not. Wang Mang placed a 1-year-old infant, Ru Ziying, on the throne and named himself acting emperor. 3 years later, in January of 9 AD, he abolished the Han entirely and declared his own dynasty, the Xin. The Western Han, one of the longest dynasties in Chinese history, ended at the table where Ping drank the pepper wine. The locked petition was found after Wang Mang's fall. It had been meant to prove his innocence. It became evidence of his crime. Wang Mang's Xin dynasty lasted 14 years. When peasant armies overran his capital in 23 AD, he was killed and dismembered. His severed head was preserved in the imperial armory for the next 272 years. He murdered a 13-year-old to end a dynasty. His head sat in a jar for 272 years, so no one would forget how. But if Han emperors died to secure their regents' futures, in Rome the pattern was crueler. Sons murdered stepbrothers, so mothers could put them on the throne. Number 4. Rome, February 11th, 55 AD. Britannicus was 1 day short of his 14th birthday. Under Roman law, the 14th birthday was the toga virilis, the ceremonial transition into adult manhood, the moment a Roman boy became a legal citizen with claims of his own. Britannicus was the son of the Emperor Claudius. His mother, Messalina, had been executed for treason in 48. His stepmother, Agrippina the Younger, had married his father in 49, adopted her own son Nero, and spent 5 years methodically moving Britannicus out of the succession. Claudius had died the previous October, poisoned. Nero was emperor, and Britannicus was about to become a man. Nero hired Locusta, the same poisoner Agrippina had used on Claudius. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio agree on the mechanics of what happened next. Locusta's first dose worked too slowly. Nero flogged her personally and threatened her with execution. She produced a faster poison. It was tested. Nero approved. The dinner on February 11th was attended by Nero, Agrippina, Britannicus, his sister Octavia, and the assembled Roman elite. Britannicus was handed a hot drink. It was tested in front of the guests by a food taster who drank a portion and stepped back. Britannicus asked for it to be cooled. Roman drinks were often served hot and then diluted with cold water at the table. The cold water was brought. The cold water contained Locusta's poison. Britannicus swallowed once. He lost his voice. He lost his breath. He collapsed at the table in front of his sister, his stepmother, and the emperor who had ordered his death. Nero told the guests it was an epileptic seizure. He told them to keep eating. The technical detail that killed Britannicus is preserved in Tacitus. Roman food tasters checked the hot drink. They did not check the cold water added afterward. Locusta had exploited the exact protocol that was supposed to protect the emperor's household. Britannicus was cremated that same night, in the rain, and buried in the mausoleum of Augustus. Nero rewarded Locusta with country estates. Agrippina had killed Claudius to put Nero on the throne. Nero killed Britannicus at a dinner table Agrippina attended. 4 years later, in 59 AD, Nero killed Agrippina too. The woman who had poisoned her way to power lived long enough to watch her son use her exact methods against her. He was killed the day before he became a man. His sister watched. His mother's murderer watched. Nero told them it was a seizure and told them to keep eating. Nero had learned from the master. The master was already the most famous poisoning victim in Roman history, Britannicus's own father. Number 3. Rome, night of October 12th, 54 AD. Claudius was 63 years old and had ruled for 13 years. He was the emperor who had conquered Britain, the emperor whose limp and stammer had made his own family underestimate him for 40 years before he took the throne. He had a personal food taster named Helotus, a eunuch whose entire professional function was to eat a portion of every meal the emperor consumed. He had a palace physician named Xenophon, who had served him faithfully for years. He had a fourth wife, Agrippina the Younger, and by October of 54, he had recently begun favoring his biological son Britannicus over his adopted son Nero as heir. That reversal was Agrippina's death warrant against him, not the other way around. Agrippina hired Locusta, then a convicted poisoner. She reached Helotus. She reached Xenophon. At a banquet on the Capitol on October 12th, Claudius ate mushrooms, which he loved. Tacitus says Helotus served the poisoned dish. Suetonius says Agrippina served it herself, eating from the harmless mushrooms to reassure her husband. Cassius Dio says she shared a single plate and gave him the largest, finest mushroom. All three sources agree on what came next. Claudius was carried from the banquet, apparently drunk. During the night, the poison took hold. When he showed signs of recovering, Xenophon inserted a poisoned feather into his throat, ostensibly to help him vomit. He died before dawn on October 13th. Nero was declared emperor within hours. Helotus kept his job under Nero for the next 14 years, a fact that some historians argue confirms he was part of the plot from the beginning. Nero later joked, publicly, that mushrooms were the food of the gods, since Claudius had become a god by eating them. Suetonius preserves the line. Nobody laughed on the record. In 2003, a clinicopathologic conference at the University of Maryland concluded that the mushrooms most likely contained muscarine, a nervous system toxin from Amanita species. Almost 2,000 years after the banquet, medicine confirmed what Rome had suspected on the morning of October 13th. The taster tasted. The wife smiled. The physician brought the feather. Rome's most protected man died at his own table because every single person around him had a reason to want him dead. The Roman playbook, a wife, a doctor, a plate of mushrooms, repeated across empires for the next 1,854 years. In 1908, in the Forbidden City, it repeated one last time. Number 2. Beijing, morning of November 14th, 1908. The Guangxu Emperor was 37 years old. He had been Emperor of China since he was 4. He had been under de facto house arrest by his own aunt, the Empress Dowager Cixi, for the last 10 years, ever since she crushed his 100 Days of Reform in 1898 and imprisoned him on Yingtai Island in the middle of Zhongnanhai Lake. His nights were guarded. His food came from the imperial kitchens Cixi controlled. His physicians were her physicians. On November 14, 1908, he complained of stomach pains. His face darkened. He died within hours. The next day, Cixi died too. Both deaths were announced together. An account preserved through the family of Puliang, Minister of Rights in the final years of the Qing, describes what happened that morning. The head eunuch Li Lianying was seen leaving Cixi's chambers carrying a special bowl of yogurt intended for the emperor. Puliang's great-grandson, Qi Gong, later a prominent Chinese calligrapher, told this story publicly before his death. 2 hours after the yogurt was delivered, the shouts began from the emperor's quarters. Cixi's motive was clean. If Guangxu outlived her, he would restart the reforms she had crushed. He would take revenge on Yuan Shikai and on Li Lianying himself. Their survival depended on his death happening first. Puyi, Guangxu's 3-year-old nephew, was placed on the throne. The Qing dynasty had 3 years left. In 1912, Puyi abdicated. Guangxu was buried in the western Qing tombs, about 100 miles southeast of Beijing. That was the story for a century. It was rumor. It was a family account. It was a suspicion held by everyone who had ever read the timing of the 2 deaths. It was not proof. Until, 100 years later, a group of scientists opened the tomb. Number 1 is not a new emperor. Number 1 is the verdict on the last one. In 2003, a team began work on a project that had no precedent in modern Chinese history. The National Qing History Compilation Committee, the China Atomic Energy Academy, and forensic scientists from the Beijing City Police combined resources to answer a question the Qing dynasty had left behind. They wanted to know what had killed Guangxu. They had access to his tomb, to hair strands preserved in the burial chamber, to 7 of his bones, and to the clothing in which he had been buried in 1908. For 5 years, they tested. In November 2008, the 100th anniversary of the emperor's death, they announced their findings. Guangxu's hair contained arsenic at 261 times the level found in the hair of his wife, Empress Long Yu, who had been buried in the same tomb. It was 132 times the level found in the hair of a Qing court official from the same period, tested as a control. The clothing over his stomach carried higher arsenic concentrations than the rest of his burial dress, a pattern consistent with poison entering the digestive tract. The total arsenic in his remains measured 201 milligrams. A lethal dose is 60 to 200 milligrams. He had been given more than a lethal dose in a single meal. The team tested against every alternative. They compared his samples with the samples of a documented chronic arsenic poisoning victim to rule out slow environmental exposure. They compared against the trace arsenic found in Chinese traditional medicine, which Qing emperors regularly consumed. The pattern did not fit chronic exposure. It fit 1 dose, 1 meal, 1 murderer. The 2008 report did not formally name a suspect. It did not have to. Every historian who has examined the evidence points to Cixi, working through Li Lianying, delivering the poison in the yogurt that Puliang's great-grandson had described being carried through the palace on the morning of November 14th. The forensic file closed a mystery that had been open since the fall of the Qing. The Empress Dowager killed the Emperor of China from her deathbed with a bowl of breakfast to protect a regency she would not live to see. The wider frame is harder to look at. Puyi, the child emperor who replaced Guangxu, was 3 years old when he was placed on the dragon throne. He was 6 when the Xinhai Revolution ended the empire in February 1912. He grew up as a former emperor in the Forbidden City, then as a puppet ruler for the Japanese in the state of Manchukuo, then as a war criminal held by the Soviets, then as a communist re-education prisoner, and finally, in his last decade, as a gardener at the Beijing Botanical Gardens. He died in 1967. The Qing dynasty did not end because it lost a war with a foreign power. It ended because an aunt murdered her nephew at breakfast 3 years before the empire fell. Guangxu's tomb still stands in the Western Qing tombs. Visitors can walk to it. His hair samples are archived in a Chinese laboratory. His great-nephew, Jin Yuzhang, who by dynastic law would have been emperor of China if the Qing had survived, is a Beijing government official in his 60s. He accepted the 2008 findings publicly. He said his ancestor had sacrificed his life for the sake of national unity and social progress. It was a gracious statement from a man whose family lost a country to a bowl of yogurt. Every emperor in this documentary was killed by someone they trusted at a table they controlled. Commodus by his mistress. Mithridates V by a guest whose name history never recorded. Henry VII by, according to what Europe believed for a century, his own confessor at the moment of communion. Romanos III by his wife, over months of meals. G of Han by the regent who had installed him, in front of a court that watched him die. Ping of Han by his father-in-law, at a winter offering ceremony he could not refuse. Britannicus by his stepbrother, one day before he would have become a man. Claudius by his wife, his physician, and his food taster, all working together. Guangxu by his aunt. Every one of them died believing the murderer would never be named. 9 of them were right. Guangxu was the exception. A century after Tixi thought she had gotten away with it, a mass spectrometer in a Beijing laboratory read the arsenic in his hair and gave the emperor his verdict. It arrived 100 years late. It arrived after the dynasty had fallen, after the last emperor had died pruning roses, after the Forbidden City had become a museum. But it arrived. There is a room in the Forbidden City called the Hall of Mental Cultivation. Emperors ate there. Cixi held court there. It is a museum room now. Tourists walk through it every day. The dining chambers of the Palatine in Rome, where Claudius ate his last mushrooms, are archaeological ruins visited by school groups. The banquet halls of the Pontic kings at Sinope are foundations under a modern Turkish town on the Black Sea coast. The Abbey Chapel at Buonconvento, where Henry VII took his last communion, still holds services. The Byzantine palace where Romanos III slowly wasted is buried under Istanbul. The Han Palace at Luoyang is an excavation site. The Chang'an Palace where Ping drank his pepper wine is a park. The dinner tables are gone. The dining rooms are museums. The emperors are dead. What survived is the pattern. The pattern is this. The most dangerous room in any empire was not the throne room. It was not the war room. It was the dining hall. The most dangerous employee was not the general who might mutiny or the senator who might conspire. It was the person pouring the wine. It was the taster who tasted. It was the wife who smiled. It was the physician who brought the feather. It was the eunuch who carried the yogurt from one chamber to another across a lake in November. Every one of these emperors sat down to a meal prepared by people they trusted. Every one of them died before the last course. The taster's nod meant nothing. The gold plate meant nothing. The guards at the door meant nothing. The empire meant nothing in the 10 seconds between the first swallow and the first convulsion. 9 emperors died at their own tables, and history had to guess who did it. One emperor died at his own table, and, a century later, science answered. The lesson is not that emperors are hard to kill. The lesson is that even the palace's most guarded room, the dining hall, was only ever as safe as the person pouring the wine. And the person pouring the wine has always been the empire's most dangerous employee.